If you think breaking someone's ego will make them love you, you're already losing the game. Because the moment you try to destroy someone, you expose the insecurity you were trying to hide. Let me tell you something most people won't say out loud. When people search for ways to destroy a woman's ego, what they're really asking is, how do I regain power when I feel rejected, ignored, or small? That question isn't about psychology. It's about pain. And pain handled the wrong way turns into control. Here's the truth you were never supposed to hear. A woman's ego is not some fragile glass waiting to be shattered. It's usually a shield built from past disappointments, comparisons, heartbreaks, and the constant pressure to be enough, but never too much. When you mistake that shield for arrogance, you misread the entire situation. Ego, in both men and women, is a defense mechanism. It says, I will not be unseen again. It says, I will not be undervalued. It says, I matter. When someone appears overly confident, dismissive, or hard to impress, that doesn't automatically mean superiority. It often means self-protection. Now listen carefully. If you truly wanted to destroy someone's ego, it wouldn't require manipulation tactics or cruel games. It would require one thing most people are too undisciplined to offer: indifference paired with self-respect. Not coldness, not insults, not emotional punishment. Calm, grounded self-respect. Because ego feeds on reaction. If she senses that her beauty, attention, or validation controls your emotional state, the dynamic shifts, not because she's evil, but because humans respond to perceived leverage. The person who reacts more emotionally often feels less powerful. But the opposite of ego clashing isn't ego destruction. It's emotional mastery. When you stop chasing approval, when you stop trying to win the interaction, when you genuinely value your own time and standards, something changes. Not just in her perception of you, but in your nervous system. You become steady, predictable, grounded, and grounded energy is rare. A woman's ego doesn't crumble when attacked. It hardens. It justifies itself. It defends. But it softens around someone who isn't threatened by it. Someone who doesn't compete for dominance. Someone who sees through the performance without shaming it. The irony? The more you try to humble someone, the smaller you look. The more you try to prove you don't care, the more obvious it becomes that you do. Real psychological strength is quiet. It's the ability to walk away without drama. It's the ability to disagree without disrespect. It's the ability to say, this doesn't work for me, and mean it. That's not destroying ego, that's dissolving power struggles. And here's the part nobody tells you. When you stop trying to shrink someone to feel bigger, you force them to confront their own behavior. Calm detachment reveals insecurity faster than insults ever could. So before you look for ways to tear someone down, ask yourself a harder question. Are you trying to destroy an ego, or are you trying to protect your own? There's something dangerous about a bruised ego. Not hers, yours. Because when a man feels ignored, replaced, or emotionally outplayed, his instinct isn't always reflection, it's retaliation. And retaliation in relationships doesn't look like shouting. It looks like subtle power games, delayed replies, withholding affection, acting unbothered while boiling inside. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The need to damage someone else's ego is often proof that yours feels threatened. You see, ego isn't loud confidence. It's identity wrapped in validation. It's the story you tell yourself about your worth. And when that story gets challenged, when she pulls back, loses interest, or doesn't respond the way you expected, it hits deeper than you admit. It hits your sense of significance. Now understand this clearly. Many women are highly attuned to emotional shifts, not because they're calculating, but because social survival has trained them to read nuance, tone, distance, energy. When you move differently out of insecurity, she feels it. And here's where the psychology gets sharp. When a woman senses you're trying to regain control through emotional withdrawal or subtle dominance, it rarely intimidates her. It confirms her decision to guard herself. She interprets it as instability, not strength. Real strength is boring. It's steady. It doesn't spike and crash based on attention. If she becomes distant, and your response is to attack her confidence, criticize her looks, question her worth, or attempt to humble her through comparison, what you're actually signaling is this: I need you to feel small so I can feel safe. That energy is detectable, and emotionally intelligent women don't collapse under it. They disengage. Here's something most people misunderstand. Attraction thrives on polarity, not competition. When two egos enter a battlefield, attraction dies quietly. It becomes a negotiation of pride instead of a connection of presence. If you truly want influence in any dynamic, the path is counterintuitive. You remove yourself from ego combat entirely. You don't react to disrespect with humiliation. You don't respond to distance with desperation. You don't try to outshine, outplay, or outsmart. You observe. And then you decide from a place of self-trust. That's power. When you calmly state your standards without trying to dominate hers, something shifts. You become non-reactive. And non-reactive people are hard to manipulate because they aren't fighting for validation. Now let's address something directly. There are moments when someone's ego does create tension, when pride blocks vulnerability, when defensiveness replaces accountability. But you don't dismantle that by force. You dismantle it by refusing to participate in the cycle. You say what's true without venom. You step back without theatrics. You keep your dignity intact. And here's the paradox that changes everything. When you stop trying to break someone's ego, you often inspire them to lower it on their own. Because safety softens pride, but control hardens it. The real question isn't how to destroy a woman's ego. It's whether you're strong enough to build yourself so solid that you don't need to. Let's go deeper than most people are willing to go. When someone says she has too much ego, what they usually mean is she doesn't respond to me the way I want. That's not psychology. That's unmet expectation. Here's the reality most men never consider. Many women grow up being evaluated constantly. Appearance, behavior, tone, ambition, confidence, but not too confident. Soft, but not weak. Successful, but still agreeable. That pressure builds layers. Some call it attitude. Some call it pride. But often, it's armor shaped by years of judgment. Now imagine trying to destroy that armor. If you criticize her confidence, she strengthens it. If you question her worth, she doubles down. If you try to humble her publicly or privately, she remembers and adjusts permanently. Because ego doesn't break under attack. It reorganizes. Psychologically, when someone feels threatened, the brain shifts into defense mode. It doesn't reflect, it protects. That's human nature, male or female. So if your strategy is confrontation disguised as dominance, you trigger survival instincts, not connection. But here's the part that changes everything. When you meet pride with composure, not competition, you interrupt the script. When you don't flinch at her standards, when you don't rush to prove yourself, when you don't crumble at her silence, something rare happens. You become emotionally unshakable in her eyes. And emotional stability is magnetic. Not because it destroys her ego, but because it exposes the difference between confidence and performance. Many people project certainty while secretly scanning for reassurance. When you're grounded, you don't feed the performance. You don't challenge it either. You simply stand firm in who you are. That's when subtle shifts begin. She may test your boundaries, not maliciously, subconsciously. Everyone does this. She wants to know, does this person bend under pressure? Does this person react to minor discomfort? Does this person panic at the thought of losing me? If the answer is yes, the dynamic tilts. If the answer is no, calmly no, the respect deepens. This is not about emotional coldness. It's about emotional regulation. There's a difference. Coldness pushes away. Regulation reassures. When you speak clearly without aggression, when you withdraw attention without punishment, when you compliment without worship, when you disagree without belittling, you signal high internal value. And here's the truth nobody markets because it's less dramatic. The fastest way to destabilize inflated pride is consistent self-respect, not humiliation, not games, not psychological warfare. Because when someone realizes you cannot be emotionally manipulated, their strategy changes. They either rise to meet your level, or they remove themselves. Both outcomes protect your peace. Understand this carefully. Trying to destroy someone's ego keeps you emotionally tied to their reactions. Mastering your own ego frees you, and freedom is power. So the next time you feel tempted to put someone in their place, pause. Ask yourself whether you're trying to lead the dynamic or win it. Because winning the ego battle often costs you the relationship, and leading with strength requires something far rarer than dominance. It requires self-control. Now let me tell you the truth that changes the entire conversation. The idea of destroying a woman's ego sounds powerful. It sounds strategic. It sounds like control. But control is the language of fear, and fear-based dynamics never create respect that lasts. What actually shifts a woman's behavior isn't ego damage. It's emotional contrast. When she meets a man who doesn't chase validation, doesn't overreact to distance, doesn't compete for dominance, and doesn't crumble under pressure, something internal recalibrates, not because she feels attacked, because she feels the absence of chaos. Chaos is common. Composure is rare. Most relationships fail not because of ego, but because of unmanaged insecurity. Two people silently asking, "Am I enough here?" while pretending they don't care. When you become internally secure, you remove the need to prove, punish, or perform. You don't need to humble someone who brags. You don't need to silence someone who tests you. You don't need to expose someone who acts superior. You simply respond from standards, and standards are different from ego. Ego says, "I must win." Standards say, "This works for me," or "It doesn't." That calm clarity unsettles inflated pride more than criticism ever could. Because when someone expects emotional turbulence and instead receives steady boundaries, they have to adjust internally. Here's the psychological truth. People respect what they cannot emotionally destabilize. If she senses that ignoring you makes you chase harder, she unconsciously associates you with volatility. If she senses that withdrawing affection makes you anxious, she associates you with emotional dependency. But if she senses that your mood, focus, and direction remain steady regardless of temporary shifts, she associates you with strength. Not loud strength, not aggressive strength, stable strength. That kind of presence doesn't destroy ego. It outgrows it. And here's something deeper. When you stop trying to reduce someone's pride, you also stop shrinking yourself. You stop obsessing over who has the upper hand. You stop measuring attention like it's currency. You stop treating connection like a competition. You become selective instead of reactive. And selectiveness is power. Because the strongest position in any dynamic is the ability to walk away peacefully. Not as a threat, not as manipulation, but as a choice rooted in self-worth. When someone realizes you don't need to diminish them to feel significant, they feel safer lowering their guard. And when guard lowers, ego softens naturally. That's the paradox most people miss. You don't conquer pride, you transcend it. So here's the question I want you to answer honestly. Have you ever tried to make someone feel smaller just because you felt unseen? Be real with yourself. Drop your answer in the comments. I read them. And if this shifted your perspective even slightly, like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who's stuck in a silent power struggle right now. Because real power isn't in breaking someone's ego, it's in mastering your own.